part is that the more the building models, internalizing factors and levels and thinking through, what alpha you want to use and interpretation and what a linear model is and what time series data is and time series decomposition. There are all these concepts that have been explored very, very heavily. But if you're not coming from that world, that to me is this other, that's the big hurdle for me this year, is to get to, laboriously going through a cross tabulation with chi-square and understanding what that is, what it means, and what I can do with it. Understanding ANOVA, what it is, where I can use it, when it a one way, when is an in way. And so I think you can get to it's funny that Ryan and I kind of had the first oh, this is fucking awesome, was I can crank through a bunch of Google Analytics views and pull some set of data. And this just saved me hours and hours of tedium. And you can kind of do that. And if you do that enough, you learn the fluency and the syntax in the tool. But then you still have to kind of keep pushing yourself to say, but what about all this other? It could be text mining. Certainly could be regression models, could be, dipping into machine learning type stuff that has the capabilities there, but you still have to figure out what is it you need to learn and then how do you learn it. And then using the code, I think, becomes sort of second nature. The code's kind of the easy part. It's actually understanding what you're doing and, what inputs you're getting and how to interpret the outputs.
Yeah. For me, I don't think it really sunk in until I tried to do something that was a little bit outside of work and something that was a little more of a personal project where I was frustrated by the data on my iPhone for my steps. I was never one with one of those fitness bands, but I thought it was pretty awesome.
I'm guessing that's not like I'm frustrated that it's I'm never actually walking that far.
I wasn't doing enough steps. That's what I opened up the dashboard and saw that I was under 10,000 a lot of days.
So you spent the next 10 hours coding and realized that didn't help at all. Your steps went down.
How do I use R to make it look like I'm walking more?
My step count is inversely correlated with my ability to my ramp up on R. I'm spending more time reading.
Totally, but then once I actually started looking at it, my step count I bet it's a lot higher now that I'm actually seeing what's happening. So, yeah, it was super helpful.
And were you hooking into, I'd cut you off. I think, were you heading down that you actually looked at your data? You hooked into the API for...
So they don't actually have an API, which kind of stinks. Apple is so guarded with all their data, so you actually physically export it from like an email. They give you an XML file. I figured out how to translate that into an R data frame and then analyze the data from there. And it was pretty interesting because it's like each step was at a different time frame, so there could be like a couple seconds apart where they would measure the steps, or a couple minutes, and it was pretty wild just to see that data. It probably looked like an old server log or something from Web Trends, I bet. But then figuring out how to aggregate that and figuring out how to use dplyr to do that kind of aggregation, that really pushed my learning forward. And then visualizing that data and just that was the most helpful thing I think I've done. Just something that was tangentially related but personal to me that I wanted to figure out, and yeah, it was helpful.
So did you start by one of your first tasks was to say, can you take that raw data and replicate what their crappy dashboard is giving you, just to kind of validate that you were looking at it the right way?
Exactly, yeah. That was the first step, is making sure that I could at least replicate and get the aggregations that they had, and that the step counts at least per day were the same as what they were showing in my dashboard in my phone. So, yeah.
So that was the other thing I read, was that, and I think, Tim, you touched on this just a minute ago, that for natural language processing and things like that, it seems like Python has got the edge over R. Is that not true anymore?
Yeah, I mean, both the tools have progressed so much that I think you just choose one and sort of go for it. I think that's my conclusion from our discussion. And that's what I did. So.
Right. Well, it sounds like choose one, but I was a little nervous that there is this, and maybe we will hear that we just haven't found, there is this active group of Python users who are talking to each other. But to echo what you were saying, we've got this sort of international group of very helpful, pretty well connected to each other, digitally, people using R. Somewhat, I guess, the R and statistics channel on Slack, occasionally somebody's like, well, I don't really use R, but here's this statistics thing. Like, we don't have a Python channel. We don't have R split up from statistics. So it may be that the Measure Slack channel is reinforcing it, but I haven't heard any evidence that that's necessarily a bad thing. Like, there aren't that many people who are doing it right now, so I guess we won't wind up with a pissing match if there's not like two active and aggressive factions.
No, but now we are teed up for the angry tweets and comments, so I'm super excited to see what happens in the Measure Slack after we launch this episode. Anyways, this is great, and I think there's some really good tangible things for people to take away from this and get. I think, for me, Ryan, it was get in there, start defining some projects, and give yourself some goals, and use